We have gathered here today to talk about Swimsuit Sayaka. But in order to do that, we first have to talk about Swimsuit Madoka, who this might be my fastest review of a character yet because there's not actually that much to talk about. So she's an aqua healer who works the following way. So she has a passive where she has a magic system where whenever someone on your team, including herself, takes damage and they have a shield on them, she will grant one magic up to a maximum of 5. So shield is a buff that reduces the amount of damage you take by a certain percentage, which is not barrier from defenders, because barrier is something different, which is the extra HP bar that defenders give to people. This is not that. This is a shield buff. How do you get shield buff? Well, first off, when you actually reach 5 magic, you will do an assist, and an assist will just happen whenever she gets 5 magic at any point, even if it's outside of her turn. And then she will just immediately restore all allies' HP by 10% of users' HP, and then advance her own action order by 15%, and then it reapplies some shield to all allies. So let's say all the allies have some shield on them, they take some damage, Madoka gets some magic stacks, and when she's at max magic stacks, she does this heal, she gives everyone some more shields. Nice. So in this case, the shield that she applies reduces all damage that they take by 20% for a total of 3 times. This of course consumes all the magic. And then her normal attack doesn't do anything, and her battle skill is basically very similar to her ability, where it's a group-wide heal that also applies shields. This is how you get shields in the first place, although the important part is that this ability also activates once at the beginning of the battle. Whenever I think the first enemy does their first attack, that will automatically trigger the assist the very first time, meaning that theoretically you don't even need to use your skill to get shield on everyone, because you already get one at the beginning of the battle from your first free assist. But if you do use your skill, you do get some HP from the healing, you get another shield as well, and then it has some bonus effects. So if Madoka's HP is higher than a certain percentage, you will gain bonus buffs that you give to the party. In this case, if her HP is 80% or higher, she will give a buff to everyone where it also increases the damage dealt when targeting elemental weakness by 10% for 2 turns, which is alright. And then she also gives everyone 3 MP if she's at 90% MP or higher, which is also pretty decent, but keep in mind that you have to be at 90% HP or higher after the heal, which you probably won't be in most cases, and even then, using a skill to just give 3 MP to all allies, which also isn't going to be that great, but at least you also get the elemental weakness damage percentage and a little bit of a heal and some shield. Like, it's a lot of like small things that a lot of these are not really going to happen. Like the HP or high, this is not going to happen on most fights where enemies do a lot of damage. You're probably not going to see these that often, sadly. So, so far not really looking that good, because these numbers are also really low, like 10% HP, and that's it. This one's 12% HP plus 400. These are rather low numbers, right? Kaede and Double Iroha have better numbers, and not just that, they also gain some bonuses, like you have regeneration from Double Iroha, or Kaede gains a lot of bonus healing when targets that she's healing are on low HP, which is going to be on most cases, because it turns out healers, for the most part, are going to be using their heals on characters who are low HP. So for the most part, stuff like HP 90% or higher is not going to happen that often. Most of the time, HP is going to be low, and then Kaede heals a lot, for example, or regeneration can take for multiple turns. Well, here you have the shield, which is nice. I'm going to talk about that in a second. First off, though, she also has a special attack, which does some damage to all enemies and then restores HP to all allies, as you would expect from a healer special. And then also it increases the attack for all allies, which is very similar, if not almost the exact same number, I think, even than Double Iroha does, except it only applies, like it only gives this buff to all allies when HP is 80% or higher. So once again, it's possible that this buff just doesn't happen, even though with Double Iroha this buff always happens. So already we're looking not really that great, because specifically if we never get this effect, and we never get the effect from the skill either, she's looking extremely weak, because all she does is very low healing and shield. And that's kind of the sad part, because this is basically the reality of Swimsuit Madoka, is that she also has really high MP costs, and then she just, in most cases, just does a little bit of healing and some shield. She also has a support ability, which is actually the best part of her. Like, this is literally the best part of this entire character, is that the support Kyoku is actually really good. It's, in my opinion, probably the best support Kyoku for healers right now. Is 10% HP, 12% speed, and on battle skill use increases damage over targeting element use by 50%, which isn't that much because it's going to be on a healer. Because I assume this is just applied to the actual character that is having this effect on them, so that really isn't going to do much, because healers don't really do damage, but at least it's better than nothing. But more importantly, the HP 10% and speed 12%, really good effects. You're probably going to put this on basically every single healer that wants this, so absolutely great. But yeah, her actual kit itself is it's kind of lacking some stuff. However, how important is the shield? So the shield is something that can actually be kind of important, because what is the #1 issue that healers face in tougher content, or like in high tower or in chaos or in score attack? The problem that healers have is, what if my teammates get killed from full HP before I can heal them? And this is why defenders are usually pretty good, because defenders stop characters from getting killed immediately, right? They give you a lot of more time. While with healers, it's possible someone gets just killed from 100 to 0, and that's it, just you can't do anything about that. But on one hand, you have heard sometimes, depending on how the timing of the assist lines up, the assist can heal in between enemy attacks to make sure you actually get people's HP back up again, which that can actually be very helpful, and is something that does actually make her better than I just talked about her. On top of that, the shield also does something similar to defenders, where it makes it more likely that characters actually survive a couple of hits from enemies and don't immediately go down. So the shield can actually be helpful with that. And in scenarios where enemies don't do much damage, and let's say you have multiple enemies, so you're fighting 5 enemies at once, for example, none of them do so much damage that you immediately die, you're going to be gaining a lot of stacks of magic, and you can counter heal with that very easily. The shield is going to be quite effective. So in situations like that, yeah, it sounds pretty good. You're also probably going to get the bonus effects from her skill and her special at high HP as well, if it's just a couple of small enemies. So yeah, against a couple of small enemies, this Madoka looks really good. She doesn't even need to use skill points, because she can just heal with her assists and everything. Awesome, great. But do you really care about content that is very easy and it's just a couple of small enemies? You probably aren't going to be too worried about that situation. You're probably going to be more worried about that big boss that just fucking kills you. And it turns out that this Madoka is kind of terrible against that. It's like probably the worst healer to actually heal when big damage comes in from big enemies. She can't really do much about that. Like, her bonus effects aren't going to trigger when she takes a whole bunch of damage, and her shield might actually be important, but outside of that shield, once your characters drop low, she will have the hardest time of all healers to actually get your characters back up. So all of that is very much not nice. But it doesn't end there, because she actually has some ways of making up for that, and if you make up for her having so low healing, she can actually become a good character again. And how do we do that? Well, first off, if you get really lucky, you can maybe get her to Ascension 2, and yeah, that's a bit tough ask, sadly, to get her, just get her to Ascension 2. But let's say you are rolling on this banner a bit more, and you do get some Ascensions for her. First off, the 30% increased MP recovery rate makes her MP cost not that steep, and secondly, you have her A2, which at battle start gives her action order, which I guess is not that important, because you're probably not going to be healing at first. Like, you could only really use this to immediately apply shield before the boss gets a turn, if you're really worried about the very first attack. But keep in mind that after the first attack, she automatically gets her first assist, and then everyone gets healed and a shield as well. So this is really if you want a shield before the first boss turn, which I guess is not that important, because otherwise I guess you're just going to use a normal attack for more skill points. Not that important. However, this is the important part, which somehow makes up for her having low heals, which is that on assist, you now increase HP recovery now by 20% and increases speed by 20%. Honestly, this should have been part of her passive. Like, this should have been part of her passive, and she wouldn't be as bad as she is right now, because she really needs this 20% HP recovery amount, and the speed, I guess, is nice as well. But yeah, this actually makes up for her heals being a bit low, because you're basically going to have this buff on basically all the time, because you're just gonna get assisted that often. I guess I would assume you're gonna get assisted that often, unless you have a really fast team against really slow enemies. Then this buff might drop off, but in most cases you'll have this buff basically all the time, I would assume. So yeah, that sounds pretty good. This actually kind of makes up for her character falling off a little. The A4 is not that important, that really isn't that important, but at least that makes up a bit. And then comes the Crystallis, which sadly I don't have right now, but I can tell you about her Crystallis, being that if you get her EX Crystallis, I can read it out to you. The EX Crystallis gives you increases weakness damage dealt by 15% and also increases HP recovery amount by 20%, both effects for self or allies with shields. So whenever someone on the team has a shield, including yourself, she basically buffs that character with passively 15% more weakness damage and 20% increased HP recovery amount. So once again, we have another buff to recovery amount, makes up for her weakness, being low healed. At the same time, she also gets more offensive capabilities, similar to Doppel-Iroha with her EX, but this one, you just get it without having to be at high HP, so that's really nice. So if you combine now her increased healing and her shield and everything, and then you also put, let's say, the Crystallis on her, like the regular Crystallis that increases healing amount, then you can actually have her heal so much that it's actually much more likely now that she activates the secondary effects of her special and of her skill for high HP, and then she actually becomes pretty nice. And then you might be able to get to a point where her passive heals from her assists with the bonus of her shields actually heals so much that she can just be a no SP healer, and a no SP healer is something that we don't actually have currently, so that actually gives her a very specific, unique niche, meaning she's not useless, she does have places where she can work. But you do have to put investment into her, you do have to give her that EX Crystallis and give her a full Crystallis setup and everything. Like, you do have to put some effort into making her not bad. But once you do, she can actually be kind of decent and do something that no other healer can do. That's basically it already for my Madoka, although I guess I can also tell you about the Crystallis you might generally use. You could also use the MP recovery, although that one is not that important. You could use speed. The speed plus 8 one, that is pretty decent. But also, like I said, you could use the regular Crystallis that just gives HP recovery amount. That one might be very helpful, as well as the one that gives a group damage reduction, either with more enemies or less enemies on the field. Personally, I would generally play her against enemies, against fights that have multiple enemies, either multiple small enemies, or let's say if you have a boss that summons multiple small enemies, because the more small enemies there are, the more hits your team takes, and the more hits your team takes, especially if they're smaller hits, the more stacks for your magic you get, and the more assist heals you get, and the more effective she's going to be overall. She doesn't really do that well against just a single big boss. So that way, you'll probably give her the Crystallis that reduces damage taken the more enemies there are, which means that of course goes on top of your shield, so your team takes a lot less damage and they get healed a lot more often. That actually sounds pretty nice. So with that, you can actually make her somewhat useful, and I said even if you don't use her, her support ability is pretty darn good, and definitely right now the best one for healers. So overall, even though she's on the weaker end and out of all these swimsuit units, the weakest swimsuit unit, she's not useless, and she definitely has some use cases. You just have to put some work into it. Okay, but now let's actually get to the important part. I have an A5 Swimsuit Sayaka. So on stream, I've gotten a bit lucky, and I got a 10 roll where I think it was my second or third 10 roll where I got both Swimsuit Madoka and Swimsuit Sayaka in the same 10 roll, and then I may have gotten another Swimsuit Sayaka right after that, so I may have gotten a bit lucky, and I've gotten an A1 Swimsuit Sayaka immediately. And I think after that, I looked more into her, I tested her out, and she seemed really good. I can tell you right now, she's really good. She's probably the best limited character in the game right now, even better than Ultimate Madoka, for example. Like, she's fantastic. So I said, you know what, I'm going to put a bunch more rolls into her to get an A2. Might have to go to 200 rolls to get an A2 Swimsuit Sayaka. And then I got like 3 more in the gacha. I just got like a Swimsuit Sayaka, and then another 10 roll was another Swimsuit Sayaka, and then like 2 10 rolls later, it was another Swimsuit Sayaka, and then another Swimsuit Madoka, and another Swimsuit Madoka. So I might have gotten a bit lucky. Okay, so this is only 200 rolls, but you know. So here's the thing about Swimsuit Sayaka. She's an Aqua debuffer, but that doesn't really describe her that well, because this should actually be a new symbol that is like half debuffer and half attacker. She's like a deep attacker or detacker, an attack buffer. No, I don't know. So here's the interesting part about it. Let's just go through her kit, because this is a banger of a kit compared to everything else we've seen so far. We're gonna start with her skill. First off, every attack that she does is a multi-hit, which means it hits multiple times. This is different than something like a Madokami ult or a Oriko ult, which has bonus hits on top of that, right? Because these still count as just a single hit. It's just a single hit that is split up into multiple smaller hits. But this really is just additional hits that happen multiple times. And the reason why this becomes important in a second. Her basic attack is also, by the way, multiple hits at once. So it's a special attack with all multiple hits at once, which is something that also Swimsuit Mami did. Swimsuit Mami also did multiple hits at once. So this is the second character in the game that can actually do multiple hits now. So you look at her skill, and it says deals 50% aqua 3 times to all enemies, which, by the way, if you do the math, that's 150% damage to all enemies, which I think is the highest AoE multiplier in the game already for a skill. And then it also has 100% chance to apply Vortex, which is an ailment. So the reason it says 100% chance, it doesn't just say applies Vortex, is because, of course, enemies could have resistances. And if the enemies have resistances, it would lower this chance a little. Although right now, most enemies don't have any resistance to Vortex because it's a new ailment, right? So what does Vortex do? It's an ailment that deals 100% aqua damage after the target is attacked 8 times. And this is why multi-hit is important, because this triggers this thing faster. But here's the important part. You don't need multiple hits. You can actually just have other characters hit the enemies. Normally, it's totally fine. You don't need multi-hits. And even though multi-hits can trigger this faster, you might say, oh, Swim Mummy can trigger this really fast now. Yeah, but you can just have Swim Sayaka do it as well. Like she also has multi-hits. Like, she has 5 hits on a special, 3 hits on her skill. She can pop this herself. And you might also just have a setup where characters just take many turns or do many hits or have follow-up attacks. Follow-up attacks, of course, count as extra hits. A Ren pops these really fucking fast. Like, a Ren immediately pops all of these with just a couple of attacks. So this is really fast with Ren, for example. So yeah, you really don't need Swim Mummy with this at all. Don't worry. And then it also applies a debuff which increases target's incoming break gauge depletion. That's a new debuff. And it turns out it's a really fucking good debuff. This is a really good debuff. 20%. This just means you break 20% faster, which in some cases could mean you break one boss turn earlier than usual. And that's pretty darn good, being able to do that. Wow, that's actually kind of insane. It also means that you could theoretically play her in a team without a breaker, and you're not going to be that much slower than if you had a breaker, right? Of course, you're still going to be slower than if you had a breaker, but it's not going to be that much slower because now everyone just deals more break damage. That is insane. On top of that, Vortex, I said it's an ailment and not a debuff. It counts, by the way, specifically as a damage over time ailment, which means an ongoing damage ailment. So we might see some ongoing damage in a second, like for example, wait a second, there's something with her support ability. There it is, decrease ongoing damage. So this means that if you see some effects in the game that talk about ongoing damage, like Nemu, for example, who can pop ongoing damage effects, yeah, that works with this one as well. This immediately pops 100% aqua damage from this thing. Because it's an ongoing damage effect, and of course, it instantly pops them. Nice. Hana, of course, as well does that. Or if you have effects that buff ongoing damage effects, like some crystals. There are crystals that buff ongoing damage effects, that applies to Vortex as well. And it gets even better. It just keeps getting better with this character. You can stack these. You can just have multiple Vortex on all enemies. If you have a Mabuyu, for example, giving you 2 turns, or you have a Hazuki who immediately gives you another turn, you can just keep stacking these. You can have like 3, 4, 5 Vortexes on the enemies. After some time, they're going to pop, of course, but you can just have multiple Vortexes on the enemies, and they're all going to work. They're all going to, yeah, they all completely stack with each other. Awesome. And then you look at the special attack, which is basically her skill, but bigger, because it does more damage, more times, which, by the way, this is about 300% AoE damage, which is the norm. Like 300% damage is about as much as you usually get on an AoE effect. Then it also decreases target's defense by 30%, because after all, she's supposed to be a debuffer, right? And then she also applies Vortex, but this one is even stronger and pops faster. 160% in 5 times. So, of course, there's also stacks with her skill. You can do skill into special attack into another skill, and you have like 3 Vortexes on the enemies, and they all are gonna pop and do so goddamn much damage. You could have like 3 Vortexes, 4 Vortexes on the enemy, and then have like a Nemu pop all of them, for example, for like 1 billion damage. That's pretty darn good. Or even if you don't have an enemy, you can just attack the enemy a bunch, and then all of them are just gonna pop one after the other, and it's gonna do us in sick damage. And how much damage is it? We're gonna talk about that in a second as well, because oh my god, this unit keeps getting better. Because we also need to talk about her ability. When a Vortex enemy is present, you just get 30% more damage dealt. You just have 30% damage dealt at all times. This is the kind of buff that you would see on an attacker, right? Like attackers buff themselves for like 25% or 20% damage up. This is even more than attackers usually give themselves. So already we're looking pretty good. But it doesn't end there. Whenever she hits an enemy, based on the number of hits she does, so I think if you use skill, you get like 3 stacks of this, for example. She gets a second 2% attack buff. That's like up to 15 times. I don't know why it says always only counts single target attacks. I think that just means that if you attack multiple enemies at once, you don't get multiple stacks at once. It only counts the number of hits on a single target. Like for example, this is just 3 times, so 3 stacks. It doesn't mean if there's 3 enemies, you get 9 stacks. I think that's what that means, even though it sounds kind of weird. So yeah, you can get a crap ton of stacks from this very quickly, and then you have a 30% attack up. 30% attack up, right? And 30% damage dealt. That's some pretty darn high numbers. What? Point is, you get a lot of stacks, and then you do 30% damage dealt, 30% attack up. Oh my god, that is insane buffs for someone who is supposedly not an attacker. This is stronger buffs than any attacker gives themselves. Like these are stronger buffs than attackers give themselves. Insane. Her support ability, by the way, is also pretty good. Increases ongoing damage up by 15%. So if there's another damage dealer that deals damage with damage of time effects, you can apply that to them, which right now is only Nemu. But Nemu doesn't really deal that much damage with her attacks because she is rather low on base attacks, so this might not even be that good for Nemu. But more importantly, when 3 or more debuffs are applied to enemies, increases speed by 15%. So specifically in AoE scenarios, will just basically always give you 15% speed. So pretty decent, but for the most part, if you have Swimsuit Sayaka, you're probably going to use her on a team. And when it comes to support Kyoku, you might use some other support Kyoku. Like, it's not that important to use this one right here. So this one's not that important. But yeah, she seems to be able to buff herself by a lot, do multi-hits and complete AoE damage to everyone. And if we also put the vortex damage into her skill and say this entire skill does this much damage, we can say, okay, it's 150% damage from 3 times aqua damage, plus 100% aqua damage on everyone, because it also applies to everyone, of course. That's 250% damage, which is far higher than anyone else's numbers as far as AoE skills are concerned. That is kind of absurd how high these numbers are. Even without Vortex, it's like the highest one, and then you put Vortex on top of that, and it's like insanely high. And then with special attacks, you have like 300% plus 160%. That's 460%. That is almost as high as single target attackers special, because those do 500%, sometimes up to 600%. But this is like 460% to everyone. She's an AoE monster that does to AoE about as high percentages as some characters do to single target. Absolutely absurd how high these percentages are. Of course, some of that is sectioned off into Vortex, which can be good, can be bad, depending on when the Vortex actually pops. It might pop when the enemy isn't broken anymore, for example, and that would be kind of sad. But yeah, that sounds kind of insane. Does it get even more insane? Kind of. Her Ascensions are pretty good. Specifically, her A1 and her A2 are kind of interesting. I wouldn't say, okay, they're not overpowered or anything. They're just decent, okay? Don't feel like you have to pull for Ascensions when it comes to this character, but they are, in fact, decent. They are, in fact, pretty good. So the first one just increases the amount of duration for ailments and debuff effects. This is not that important. It makes it so theoretically, you don't need to use your skill that often if you, for example, the enemy isn't broken and you don't want to reapply the breakage debuff, or you have some stretches where you don't use your special in a while, then the defense debuff is going to drop off, and the 1 turn to ailment just gives you more time to pop the ailments from the vortex, although in most cases those vortexes aren't going to survive long enough anyway for them to drop off. They're just going to pop at some point. Like, you don't have to worry about that. I don't even know if they have a duration on them. I've never seen them like blink or whatever, like they're about to run out, like never. So I don't even know if they can run out, so it is maybe not that important. But the A2, it makes you stack your stacks that you get for your attack percentages much faster. And then on top of that, on enemy break, increases attack by 10% and speed by 10%. So now you can lean even more into being an attacker, because now when you want to be an attacker and say, hey, I want to deal some damage, when do you deal damage? When the enemy is broken. So here's some buffs when the enemy is broken. Nice. I think this is the A1 for attackers, actually, because attackers basically get a very similar effect as their A1. You just have it now, even though you're a debuffer, which, you know, maybe she's not actually a debuffer after all. Maybe she's just an attacker in disguise. And then the A4 deserves a special shout out, because, yeah, the debuff effects, yeah, debuff, you have the break gauge depletion debuff. That's pretty nice. That gets improved, which is actually really nice. The defense effect gets improved. That's also really nice. But ailment effect, it makes your vortex deal more damage. There's now 30% more damage on your vortex. That is kind of good. I'm not gonna say like that's kind of good, man. That's kind of really good. So yeah, overall, she seems kind of great. As far as Crystallis is concerned, I can tell you right now, her EX Crystallis is maybe not the best. Okay, EX Crystallis says increases vortex damage dealt by 25%, which overall your vortex makes up half your damage, or maybe less than half your damage. I'm not exactly certain how much it's going to make up, but if you do the math, it maybe only increases your damage overall by like 12%, and using an EX Crystallis for just 12% more damage, that's kind of low. I'm not certain about using that. And it also says on basic attack, advances action roll by 10%. It's also not really that good. So her EX Crystallis at least is not that great. You're probably not going to use it. You're probably going to use something like, you have the aqua attack damage up. You're going to use the attack percentage. I don't have it, but you would use the attack percentage probably. Then you could also use the damage to weak element, which I also don't have, sadly. You can use that one instead, or something like that. Yeah, so weak element, aqua damage, and attack percentage are probably the 3 that you're going to use in most cases. But theoretically, if you, for example, struggle with applying debuffs or struggle with applying your ailment against enemies that have really high resistances, there are, of course, the Crystallis that make you hit those more often if you don't care about her dealing damage. Though you should care about her dealing damage. And you could theoretically build her in other stuff. You could give her more speed if you want her to get more turns. Because keep in mind, she stacks. all of her vortexes, they stack. So if she has more speed and gets more turns, you can stack more vortexes at once theoretically, if you do want to do that, but it's not really that important. Keep in mind that if you do play her like an attacker, she has way more speed than any attacker. Like 106 speed is absurd in the realms of attackers. Like attackers usually have like 90 speed or something like that, like something really low. But yeah, she's also really fast for an attacker. I'm just gonna call her an attacker because that's basically what she is. So now that we've talked about all of that, what else can we take a look at? Well, I also need to talk about their portraits and their support Kyuku for a second. So as far as the Swimsuit Madoka is concerned, you probably want to just use the HP recovery amount one. So on other healers, maybe sometimes you use speed or you use MP because they can only heal on their turn and their specials are very important. So with those, using speed and MP recovery might be important. But here, since you're going to be doing a lot of healing just passively through your assist, increasing your assist by just increasing HP recovery amount by 30% with this portrait does seem like a pretty good choice. But of course, theoretically, you can still also go with speed or MP recovery. But still, I think this one is the one that I would choose. For Swimsuit Sayaka, I would just go with the attack one because you just want to have as much attack as possible. You could also go for speed if you really want to, but not that important. Speed might help you if you want to play more like an actual debuffer instead of more like an attacker, even if you play her not as the attacker on the team and you have an attacker standing next to her, you probably still want to get more attack because that's just more effective, in my opinion, for increasing the output of your team than getting more speed, for example. So that would be my choice for that. And as far as support Kyuku are concerned, for Swimsuit Madoka, there are a lot of choices you can do. You might, for example, go for a Kaede, or you could go for a Doppel Iroha, or you could go for a Yuma, for example. Those are the choices you can make. Apart from that, there's not many other choices that really make it that much sense. So these are going to be your top choices. And as far as your Swimsuit Sayaka is concerned, you can have either Nemu, or you can have your Ren. You can have your Ayame, for example, if you have neither of those. Outside of that, there's also not that many great choices that you can make because all the other ones don't really quite fit to what you want to do. So Ayame is probably your best low rarity choice here. I hope that in the future they actually get better debuff support Kyuku for just damage, because as far as just damage is concerned, there are not really that many good choices. But maybe in the future, once you have like another character that's similar to Swimsuit Sayaka actually increases damage on support, that would be probably at that point then the next good choice for your Swimsuit Sayaka. Or if there's another Aqua character, like another Aqua attacker that is built about increasing attack or just damage, that would also be a good choice for your Swimsuit Sayaka. But right now, this is probably about the best that we can do with these supports right here. Okay, so let's now take a step back and actually talk about why Swimsuit Sayaka is, in my opinion, such an important character. Even though I'm going to glaze her a lot, and I've already glazed her a lot, you don't have to pull for her. She does some really cool things, but she doesn't specifically like power creep one specific unit or whatever. So if you already have some good characters, you don't really have to pull for her. Keep that also in mind. She is limited though, so you're not going to randomly pull her from the standard banner, and you would have to wait for her rerun. So that said, also I believe that in September, in October, somewhere around that time, we're probably going to get the Rebellion window, which would mean Akuma Homoda. Keep all of that in mind for your choices to pull. But that said, let's talk about some teams, because the important part with Swimsuit Sayaka is that she allows you to do some crazy stuff with your team building that other characters don't really facilitate. So usually you have an attacker in your first slot. Usually you might have something like, let's say you have a Madokami here, and let's say you have your debuffer over here, and this would be an actual normal team. Attacker, breaker, 2 supports, and then your sustain right here. This is usually what you have. But if you play it like this, you can play your Sayaka as a sub DPS, meaning that someone who deals a bunch of DPS, who is not an attacker, who just helps the attacker out by putting more attacks and more damage onto the field. But in exchange for that, her actual debuffing capabilities are not as strong as someone like a Ren, for example, right? So it doesn't increase the amount of damage that your team does by as much as any of the other debuffers do, any of the other 5-star debuffers do, because she only has the 30% defense down, which is a good debuff, but other debuffers usually have a bit more to offer. But because she does so much of her own damage, she's actually able to make up for that, and probably still overall, as far as team damage is concerned, still give you about as much team damage as if you had another character in here like a Ren, for example, another debuffer. But on top of all of that, she then also gives you the debuff to increase break damage, break gauge depletion. So this team actually breaks faster than if there was another debuffer in here. And already, that's something kind of unique. You actually break faster now than if you had Ren here, for example, or a Tsukasa or something like that, or a Felicia. You now break a bit faster. That's a nice little bonus. So you could just stop here. You could just stop here and say we have about the same damage as if this was a regular debuffer, and we do break a little bit faster than usual, and that makes her a good character. And then we can just move on with our lives and not think about anything else. But we can get a bit spicy. We can say, for example, what if the enemy is weak to Aqua? Then we do the following. We put our little Swimsuit Sayaka not as the debuffer, we put her as the attacker. And then we have another free slot that we use, for example, for another debuffer that we can use. Or we could use it for another buffer. Let's say, for example, I want to use Mabayu here. Because as I said earlier, Vortex stacks, so you can't actually just have Mabayu double crank out Vortexes with Swimsuit Sayaka, which is actually extremely good, because more turns on Swimsuit Sayaka means more stacks that you can gain for her passive, and also means that she can pop Vortexes faster if she gets more turns. So this is actually a really good combo to have Mabayu here as well. But if you don't want to use Mabayu for some reason, then also works pretty decently well in this spot. So that also already looks pretty darn good. And you might think, okay, but we don't have an attacker, so how much damage are we actually looking at? And I did some experiments that I will have to show you about how well this actually performs. Okay, so here's a little experiment that I did, and this was in the past before I got my A5 Sayaka, before she had more Crystallis. So this is a Sayaka that is closer to what you as a free-to-play might have when you actually pull her from the gacha, although she doesn't have any good Crystallis yet. So let's see how she does. And what I did with this setup is that I put her into the boss fight against the nameless AI who is weak to water, and I just want to see how fast can I kill this boss. And I'm gonna go here at twice the speed, and I'm gonna just see how fast this goes. And I just tunneled into the boss and only into the boss by using Mabayu only on Swim Sayaka to just see how much damage can I put out if I just go full Unga Bunga, just damage, just push, and to see how hard I can kill the boss and how quickly I can kill the boss. And we see that I actually do chunk the boss quite easily. And on top of that, and this is maybe the more important part if you're watching this, the ads on the side, they just die. They just explode after some while. Like, look at how much damage that did, because all of the vortexes on the side enemies, they all popped at once while the enemies were broken. And so we have broken vortexes, bam, they all explode. They do a whole bunch of damage and the enemies just explode. Even though I was just tunneling on the boss and only on the boss, because she's full AoE and does so much damage in AoE, she's easily the best AoE character in the game right now. Like, Oriko can't even touch this, I don't think. Although maybe, actually maybe not quite, but she's about Oriko level at least. So yeah, you see that she actually does a crap ton of damage with all those popping vortexes and just generally with all of those stacks that she gets from attacking. And yeah, she just absolutely smacks this boss really hard and the boss just explodes. So how much damage, how much time did that take? I think it took about 2 minutes or something. I don't have the exact time written down, but I can tell you that I did the exact same thing with a Kyoko instead, where I changed and said, hey, let's have a Kyoko instead. So the boss is also weak to fire, and theoretically I would be testing this against my Yachio, but my Yachio is A5 and has really good Crystallis, so it wouldn't really be that fair. But my Kyoko, she's A2, but she doesn't have a Crystallis, so I think they're about similar maybe in terms of investment, because the A2 for Kyoko is pretty good, but she doesn't have a Crystallis, so I hope it kind of balances out a little, and that they're similar levels of investment at least. And Kyoko does get to use a much better support Kyoko that Swimsuit Sayaka doesn't get to use. So we then do the exact same thing, we just tunnel into the boss. And one thing that you're gonna see is, because we have so much less AoE damage, the ads on the side, they barely get scratched, and I think one of them even survives the entire fight. But I also, once again, I just tunnel into the boss. I just want to do as much damage as possible into the boss. And in both of these cases, the boss is gonna die before the boss gets broken, so we don't have to worry too much about how much damage you're gonna do specifically in break, because I can tell you in break, of course, the attacker, specifically Kyoko, who gets bonuses for enemies being in break, is gonna do more. But just at a base even playing field, if we just have the most even playing field possible, if we just hit someone who isn't in break, we're gonna see that we actually still kill the boss at a very similar amount of time, but the ads on the side, they stay alive for a lot longer. They don't really die that much, but we're still able to kill the boss rather quickly. And I did time it, and the clear times are kind of similar. Kyoko cleared about 5 to 10 seconds faster in about a 2-minute clear time, which that's not that big of a difference. That really isn't that big of a difference between these two fights. And keep in mind, because it was me manually playing, and I played the one with Swimsuit Sayaka first, I might have played a little bit slower than usual. because I had to actually figure out how to play this fight. But generally, the clear times are somewhat similar, right? And then I did another test. Let's just go full ham. And I said, what if I say I want to make a full team that just tries to kill this boss as hard as possible? And that team is the following. I did the Ren team, where instead of Mabayu, I picked Ren, and I have now another sub DPS, because Ren is a sub DPS herself, meaning that she also gives a whole bunch of more damage to the field on her own. So now we have a setup of someone who can be played as either a sub DPS or a main DPS, is taking a role of a main DPS, in this case from Sayaka, and someone who is either just a pure debuffer or a sub DPS. So being played as a sub DPS here. Theoretically, yes, can also play Ren as a main DPS, but it's not quite as effective in this case. And I just said, let's go to wheel, because both of these characters are neutral against wheel, and I just want to see what happens if we're fighting an enemy that's neutral, meaning we have resistance debuffs, right? So in Nightmare mode, when you fight an enemy that you're not strong against, like in this case, Aqua and Void isn't strong against this enemy, you actually do reduced damage by about 35% reduced damage, which is a lot. But you see that the boss breaks really, really fast. The boss actually breaks insanely fast, and that's because of the bonus break gauge reduction that we get from Swimsuit Sayaka. And we also see that whenever we apply Vortex to the enemy, it breaks almost immediately because we just have so many Ren attacks. And then the big damage bang happens with everything, with our Sayaka getting so many turns, and the boss just explodes. The boss actually just explodes so goddamn fast, and the boss can't do anything. Now keep in mind, the boss is resistant to us. The boss takes reduced damage from all of our attacks by about 35%, and we still smacked it this hard. This was an absolute massacre against this guy, and we don't have an attacker. We killed this guy in a single round. What an absolute massacre. This guy couldn't do shit to us. But if you think it stops there, oh my god, does it get better. It's somehow it gets better. Because I went and I checked, can I do some chaos enemies with that? And I went and I did chaos. And I went against Chaos Boss 2 in this case, with this very team. I had to get Selena in there as a breaker instead of a Pluvia, because this boss is weak to water, so of course I had to get a water breaker in here. And this is the hardest, we're talking about Chaos Boss, he's the hardest bosses in the game. And somehow things went really, really well. Things went kind of insane. I think this is the wrong fight. So we're gonna watch this fight from the very beginning, because this is the big fight that I did, because it took me like 2 or 3 tries, because this boss can be somewhat RNG heavy, because this boss has really high resistances to debuffs, or sometimes you have fights where your debuffs just don't land on the enemy, and if your debuffs don't land, the boss is really powerful, so that's kind of sad. But I just had a fight here where my debuffs didn't get resisted as much against this boss. So after landing some debuffs, you can see that once some debuffs get going, suddenly the boss becomes very weak. And suddenly my team becomes very powerful. And suddenly the boss just has a really, really bad time. So this is, like I said, the hardest content supposedly in the entire game. And I'm about to smack this guy really, really hard in just a handful of turns. So the boss is taking a lot of break damage now, because the more debuffs you have on the enemy, the more break damage it takes. And we're just about to hit round 2. We're just about to hit round 2. And this guy is almost broken. In just a single round, I almost broke this guy. He's getting broken now. I think he just got his second turn or something. He just barely got any turn at all. He just barely even existed. And then he gets broken here. Now I did this fight before with a Yachio team, and I did this on stream. So if you watched my recent stream that I did just before this, I did a fight with my Yachio team instead. And my Yachio team, that also had more murder on it, by the way, struggled really hard. It took me a lot of tries to kill this guy with my Yachio team. And with my Yachio team, it took me the entire break time. So you can see this boss still takes like 50 action value to take a turn. And with my Yachio team, I had to take all of that. I had to kill the boss just barely before the boss got out of a break, and I had less than 40% remaining HP, and I think I also got it on round 3, so I had to play for additional boss turns. But I've broken the boss 2 turns faster than I did with my Yachio team. So not only did I break much faster, I'm going to kill the boss much faster too, in the break. So, like I said, with my Yachio team, I had to just barely do it in the break time, but in here, I still have like 31 AV left, and the boss is about to go down, because this damage is actually kind of insane. Like, I'm pumping this boss so hard, this guy can't do anything. If you go to the beginning of the break, this guy dies such insane speeds that this is much faster with an attacker. I'm gonna be honest, this is much faster with my Yachio. My Yachio might have crit for like 800,000 or something, which, yeah, sounds pretty good, like some pretty high crit right there. But this team is like a shredder that just keeps shredding and shredding and punching and scything because we have a scythe on our team, and then vortex explode, and it's just a massacre. It's absolutely just a massacre with how this guy absolutely explodes. So yeah, this is kind of powerful. That not only we have faster breaks because we have the break gauge depletion buff. Against this boss specifically, like I said, this boss gets weaker the more debuffs you have, so of course we have more debuffers now. But also the damage of just having all of these debuffs on the team with the buffs from Mami, and then you have Bofaren, who does a lot of damage, and then you have your Swimsuit Sayaka, which does a lot of damage. We now have unlocked more playstyles, and this is what I wanted to get to. This is why I did this whole extra section at the end of this video. This section is not just to show you Swimsuit Sayaka is powerful, but now it's also to show you can choose different kinds of teams now. You don't have to have an attacker on your team anymore. I know I've said this in the past, but it's never been as true as now. You don't need to have an attacker on the team anymore. Because specifically against Aqua Weak enemies, you can just play a Swimsuit Sayaka now. And you just do about as much damage as an attacker would, right? Against Aqua Weak enemies, we now have different playstyles. And sure, against someone that's like, let's say, only Dark Weak, and it's not Aqua Weak, you're going to play a Homura instead. You're still not going to use Swimsuit Sayaka as an attacker against someone who's not Aqua Weak, sure. But against neutral targets or against weak targets, sure. Let's say you have no attacker that is of the correct element. Like, let's say the enemy is light weak, you don't have a light attacker of 5-star, but you have a Swimsuit Sayaka, then you might play a Swimsuit Sayaka instead. You could just do that, right? But of course, as far as edible weakness is concerned, you're still going to play to elemental weakness. You're still going to use a Homura on a Dark Weak enemy, for example. But now, against Aqua Weak enemies specifically, you could just use a Swimsuit Sayaka. Like, you don't have to do that. Because also keep in mind that even if her damage is a bit lower, you break faster. So you get more breaks, and you get faster breaks. And you could still play an attacker on the team. You could still play Yachio here, for example, and then have her be the debuffer, and have her do a crap ton of damage as a debuffer, and have her be a sub-DPS. You could even play without breaker, right? Why not play without breaker? Who needs a breaker when you have the breaker debuff? Okay, you still break slower, you still break much slower, but not that much slower. You could still do it. So this is what I wanted to tell you, is that generally now with your Swimsuit Sayaka, you're able to play different kinds of strategies, and she's able to perform really well in those different kinds of strategies. But she's not like more powerful than Yachio in terms of just damage in most cases, right? In this case, it's only happening because the boss just becomes weaker the more debuffs are on the boss. So in this case specifically, it happens to work out that way. But she's still not doing as much damage as an attacker, for example. So she doesn't power creep that, okay? Doesn't power creep Ren or another debuffers, because even though she does more damage than other debuffers, she doesn't do as good of a job at actually debuffing the enemy as debuffers do. Like, Ren gives way more damage amplification to the team than a Swimsuit Sayaka, for example. So it's any of the other debuffers, right? So she is not as good as debuffing as debuffers. She's not as good as breaking as a breaker. She's not as good as attacking as attackers. But she's pretty decent at all of these at once, meaning that you can slot her into many different situations and have her do the jobs of other characters, which gives you more freedom in how you want to actually build your team. And that character freedom, that team building freedom, is, I think, what makes Sayaka so important. That said, like I said, she doesn't directly power creep someone, so you don't have to pull for her. Especially, like I said, we might get Akumura in like 2 or 3 months. Who knows? It's possible. So yeah, that was a really long video, but I kind of wanted to get all of that out there to really tell you, if you have Swimsuit Sayaka, you might want to consider investing into her and make some stuff happen. Try to build some cool teams, because you can do some cool teams with her. The fact that her attacks and her ailments stack means that you can do Mabayu stuff, you can do Hasuki stuff with her, get a ton of vortex on the enemy, you can use a Nemu, make those explode. You can do some really cool stuff with her. So yeah, that was that. I hope you guys enjoyed this. Hit the subscribe button, ring the bell, and I'll see you guys next time. And for the first time, I also want to give a special shout out to my members on YouTube, which includes Rip Van Winkle and Zimbletor. Thank you very much.